Morning, it is Sunday, June the 19th, 2022. The title of the message today is Teach Your Children. We'll be looking at Psalm 78th chapter, verses 1 through 8, specifically in this message. There's a battle raging in our nation today that is unprecedented in its potential negative impact and its obvious alignment with evil. This conflict is not being contested on typical battlefields, nor is it being fought with traditional weapons of war. This battle is for the hearts and minds of our children, and it is being waged in classrooms, courtrooms, governmental institutions, online via the internet, through every form of entertainment, and in homes all around our country. And the main weapon deployed in this fight is misinformation, lies, half-truths, and distortions of the truth intended to mislead, corrupt, and prepare our children to believe sinful things are not only acceptable, but also normal. Thankfully, God knew this day would come, and as always, He has a plan to combat these efforts of evil and a part for each of us to play in that plan. A key element of that plan is parents. And with today being Father's Day, I am going to focus on fathers specifically. One of the greatest reasons so many children are vulnerable to the efforts at work against them is the lack of a positive fatherly influence, or the lack of a father entirely in their lives. And while I certainly believe both mothers and fathers are critical to the upbringing of any child, fathers are far more likely to fail in this responsibility. Statistics from numerous and varied sources bear this out. The state of New Mexico ranks third worst in the nation, with just over 50% of children living with both parents in a family home. And in the larger urban areas of the state, the numbers are even lower. According to fathers.com, children from fatherless homes are more likely to be poor, become involved in drug and alcohol abuse, drop out of school, and suffer from health and emotional problems. In fact, some fathering advocates would say that almost every social ill faced by America's children is related to fatherlessness. This is not a new problem, as many of the fathers who are failing their children today were themselves children whose fathers failed them. And so I want us to focus on the importance of fathers and their role in preparing their children to stand up to the unrelenting attacks they will endure during their formative years. We'll begin with a call to action found in Psalm chapter 78, verses 1 through 4. The scriptures say this: "My people, hear my instruction. Listen to the words from my mouth. I will declare wise sayings. I will speak mysteries from the past, things we have heard and known, and that our ancestors have passed down to us." Then in verse 4, "We will not hide them from their children, but will tell a future generation the praiseworthy acts of the Lord, His might, and the wondrous works He has performed." First, fathers are called to remember what we know. If you were raised in a Christian home, you have been blessed with an upbringing that included being taught about the Bible, all that God has done, and all that He is still doing. If you weren't, perhaps you learned much of the same through your involvement with the church or through Bible study with other believers. But regardless of how you acquired the biblical knowledge you possess, you know things that every child in this world needs to hear. Second, fathers are called to remember why we know what we know. Why do you know what you know about the Bible and about God? Because someone took the time to share with you. Because someone showed you how important those truths were to them, and because someone knew it was critical to do so. Many of us here this morning have benefited from someone caring enough to tell us the important truths of the Bible, which brings us to the third point this morning. Fathers are called to share what we know. Verse 4 says, "We will not hide them, the things that God has done that have been passed down from their children." When you discover something good or beneficial, your natural inclination is to tell others about it. Think about a product that made you feel better or a program of some kind that worked for you. You don't keep that information to yourself, in essence, hiding it from others who might benefit from it. The same goes for what you know about the Bible and God. It's not meant to be hidden. It's meant to be shared. Next, why is it so important that we do? Reading from Psalm chapter 78, verses 5 through 8. He, God, established a testimony in Jacob and set up a law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so that a future generation, children yet to be born, might know. They were to rise and tell their children, so that they might put their confidence in God and not forget God's works, but keep his commands. Finally, in verse 8, then they would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation whose heart was not loyal and whose spirit was not faithful to God. Fathers, it is important we share what we know because teaching touches the future. I hate to break it to you, but you will not always be here for your children. A time will come when all they have left of you on this earth is what you taught them and the example you set for them. If that were to be tomorrow, what would your legacy be? Would it be a legacy of godly instruction and setting a godly example, or something much, much less? What you teach your children today, the example you set for them today, will outlive you through their lives. It is also important that every father shares what he knows, because teaching shapes the future. If you are a father, the example you set for your children will not only shape and direct their lives, but it will also go a long way in determining how they relate and respond to God. If your children see prayer, Bible study, and church attendance are important to you, then prayer, Bible study, and church attendance will be important to them. This is why each father should take their children to church, not send them to church. Read the Bible with their children instead of hoping someone else will, and live out the values they say are important, so their children will know it's not just words, but a way of life. The one thing you should never want to see happen in your child's life is that he or she forgets about what God has done and fails to follow his ways. Finally, fathers, it is important you share what you know, because teaching protects the future. If you have raised your children in the way we talked about this morning, if you have taught them about what God has done and is still doing in this world, then you have given them a great blessing, a blessing that will lead to more blessings throughout their lives. And if they are faithful, a blessing they will pass on to their children. Proverbs 22, verse 6, a very familiar verse, says this: "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." If you want to impact the lives not only of your children, but your grandchildren and great-grandchildren as well, then you need to be a faithful father who remembers what you know, why you know it, and that you are called to share it with your children. You must do so if you wish to touch the future, shape the future, and protect the future for your children and theirs. In closing, I mentioned earlier, God knew the world in which we live today would come, that he has a plan, and that he has a part for each of us to play in that plan. And while I have focused on fathers, I want to remind everyone that we each have a responsibility to share the truth of God's word with children anytime we can do so. Here, where we live, only half of the children you will encounter live in a home with both their parents. More importantly, of those, only a small percentage live in Christian homes. While we may never be able to make up for a missing parent in a child's life, we can share the gospel with that child. We can share a portion of God's truth with him or her. And we can show that child a little bit of God's love for them. I want to challenge you to make an eternal difference in a child's life. And fathers, I want to challenge you to be the man God has called you to be in the life of your children. Their future depends on it. God bless you all this week.